We're now going to move on to looking at ways to find elements of data within a large table or range of cells. So the first thing we're going to do, we'll come over to our worksheet called Index Match Simple. And we're going to start with something called VLOOKUP. The V stands for vertical. There's also an HLOOKUP for horizontal, but most of the time we're doing stuff with a VLOOKUP. There are other times we do use HLOOKUP, but for most purposes we do a VLOOKUP. So the idea here is we have this table of student data where we have their ID, their first name, last name, email, GPA, their SAT scores, right? And ideally we want to be able to put in this green cell here the student ID, and it pulls out all of their corresponding information, right? So up here we might want to do something like put, let's just do the first one, 4370, right? And we want to be able to get first name, which should be Noah, the second name, which should be last name, which should be Smith, the email, all that stuff, right? So the formula for this, right, is, let me come over, equal VLOOKUP, all right? And we can either hit this little insert function to see all the different parameters if we want. The lookup value, that's the thing we're trying to find everything that's associated with it. So in our case, it's this 4370. So I'm going to click on this cell. Notice when I do that, instead of it saying K3, it says ID. That means I must have named that column or that cell to be ID, which makes a lot of sense, right? So remember we talked about naming was a good idea. The table array. So here, what we want is all of this guy here. And you'll notice that when I do that, it calls it data. All right, so that means I named that cell range also. And then finally, the last parameter that is required, again, remember we know it's required because it's in bold, is the column number. So that's the column number from which we're matching the value. So the first name is in the second column. The lookup value is in the first column. So it's always looking to the right of that column, usually. So let's do 2, and it says it's going to return Sebastian. Okay, let's click OK. So it returns Sebastian. Well, we just said no, it shouldn't do that. It should return Noah, not Sebastian, right? So what's it doing? Well, if we click on it again, notice that there is a final parameter that's in square brackets here. We see that square bracket called range lookup. That means that it's an optional parameter. So I'm going to go back in and click insert function again. Range lookup, if I click on this, is a logical value to find the closest match in the first column sorted in ascending order. Well, we don't have them in ascending order, it doesn't look like. So it's true. So by default, it'll do an approximate match. In our case, we don't want that. We want it to be an exact match, which is false, right? And now notice that the return is going to say Noah. So let's click OK. And now we have the correct first name coming up. All right. So I'm gonna find the last name again. I'm gonna do a VLOOKUP again. VLOOKUP. And the lookup value. If I have already named the columns or the cells like I did, which is nice, you can hit F3 to paste the name. So we'll see ID. Click OK. The table array, hit F3 again, and I have that data as one of them. Right? Click OK. And notice once I do that, it comes over here in red and points to the right thing. The column index is 3, and again we want a false. Noah Smith, right? So that looks like it's doing the correct thing. Now the other nice thing about the names, right, is that if I drag it down, it will keep the ID and data right. What it doesn't do is it doesn't do the correct column number. So I'm going to go back in and correct all of those by hand. There are other ways you can make this a little more dynamic, but for our purposes right now, it is not worth it. So it's just as easy to go in and change everything by simply changing the column number. So now we have every piece of information for this particular ID. So let's try a different ID. That's 8226. That's the first one I kind of saw. Carter Harris. Was that right? Yes, right. Let's try, I'm just going to type in 1515. I have no idea if that's in there. All right, so what does it mean? It means value not available error, right? So what that means is if I click on this guy and I click the insert function again, formula result, right? If it can't find that number, that ID, it comes back with this value not, right? We might want to do something like is error and give a nice error message to that, but we don't have to. So let's go back to 4181. Let's try that guy. Gabriel Rodriguez. Yes, right? So that looks like it's working. So that's VLOOKUP, finding from a table, using that ID, all the different pieces along that one particular row. So that's very useful.